Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. On today's episode, we're going to be making an Elden Ring prop. Specifically, the Site of Grace. Here are the topics I will be covering today. It's a little bit of a lengthy one, so if you would like, I have made a handy dandy chapter list in the description below that you can go check out if you want to skip to a specific part in the video. Without further ado, let's get into it. In the game Elden Ring, the Site of Grace is this little gold light that you go up to, kind of acts like a save point. You can level up your character, mix up potions, and even take a little nap if you want. The main reason I wanted to make this, aside from being a massive Elden Ring fan, was because I wanted to take this to conventions and camp out and have people come visit me. Maybe they'll get some candy for stopping by to level up. Now to get started, the first thing I did was model out the light part of the Grace. I used a sculpting program called ZBrush. Now you don't have to use ZBrush to sculpt this, by the way. There are other 3D programs out there that can do something very similar. Blender is a good one, and it is free. The shape of the light is very ghost-like and moves around quite a bit, so I wanted to emulate that with the shape of the model. Mine wouldn't be moving, so I did the best I could to give it a shape that had an illusion of movement to it and made sure that it looks different from any angle. You can see me spinning around the model pretty frequently here, and that's what I'm checking. Once I was happy with the overall shape, I started sculpting in some additional details and added some noise to the surface to make it feel more natural. And here's what I ended up with. The last step on the model was to make it hollow, so I had room for the LEDs. And by the way, I've put this model up on my Patreon for free if you'd like to follow along and make this yourself, so definitely go check that out. And with our model done, we are ready to print. Before printing something, you have to put it through what's called a slicing software. What this does is convert your model file into data that the printer can read. This is also the program where you add supports to your model if you need to. A little bit more on that later. Alrighty, so I wanted to show y'all where I am. Before I actually got around to printing the main piece, what I wanted to do was make sure my printer was working, so I did a test print. I'd like to introduce everybody to the calibration cat. He is a test print that a lot of people use to test their printers before they do something big and complicated. It's very helpful to make sure your printer's working. It's a good thing I did this too, because printer was not working. You see there's some little holes in the top? Also, his tail fell off. So, yeah, something's wrong. I did a couple of changes to my settings, and I got this. It is some kitty cat biscotti. That's the things I didn't work. So, luckily I figured out what it was. All it was my filament. It was tangled up. It's definitely a thing that can happen. If your printer fails, make sure that's the first thing you really should check. It took me way too long. After untangling it, I finally got a calibration cat that was correct. So he is all good. He has a smooth head. He has a tail that works. So yeah, he was all ready to go. After I got that situated, I was able to print my lovely two halves of my Grace site. So I ended up doing it in two pieces so I could more easily put the LEDs inside. It's gonna act like a little clamshell kind of thing. The next thing we need to do is remove the supports. If you notice on here, this is more solid and this is a little bit of a different texture. It's kind of hard to see with the filament, but all of these are supports. When you're printing anything, things need to be flat. You have to generate supports for it to work properly. So next is removing those. We're gonna get onto that next. For removing that support material, I highly recommend using some flat pliers. These are great for getting into those nooks and crannies that might befall you on your 3D printing journey. Sometimes the supports take a bit of effort to pull off, but you shouldn't have to worry about being too careful removing them, as long as your print isn't really thin. I love this part, by the way. It's very satisfying. Okay, after that we have one half done. Took a minute getting this part out because there was a little bit of the supports in here, and I need this channel for wires to go in, so I really struggled a little bit to get that out. Okay, so after that, I have my two pieces. They are cleaned out. I will probably have to sand the edges a little bit because it doesn't matter however clean your print comes out. Usually there's still going to be some rough spots that you have to sand out before you're able to glue something smoothly together, but there it is. He's a little guy. I'm very excited. So you can kind of see that there are some gaps And that's okay because once I start sanding the edges down a little bit, they will come out and it'll get a lot more flush. If it doesn't get more flush, my backup is to probably just fill it with hot glue because hot glue is also translucent. I don't think you're gonna notice that much, so that's my plan. Next step is gonna be sanding these edges. Also, this is all of the support material that came off. You can see how thin it is. It's printed that way so it's a lot easier to pull away. The print is a lot thicker and harder. This is very thin and weak, so it's very easy to pull off and not destroy your print. For sanding, I use about 100 grit to start with. This is the initial stage that helps get rid of any larger imperfections. Normally for 3D prints, I would also sand the outside to remove the print lines, but because this is printed with translucent filament and it's going to light up, I don't really feel like I needed to since you really can't see the surface too well. Update time! So y'all saw me sanding this thing, claiming that I would be totally cool if there were gaps because I would just fill them with hot glue. Well, I lied. I did not like that. I started working on this and noticed how big the gaps were gonna be. I thought I was being cute, making the seam curved so it'd be more organic or something. I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking. So I ended up redesigning the grace piece. So it's now printing flat, and that required a lot less supports, and it fits so much flusher. It was really what I should have done from the very beginning. But that's okay. I think I'm gonna like it a lot better. It's gonna be a lot easier to glue. That was the other problem is when you are gluing PLA, this is PLA print. I usually use super glue, especially with something like super glue. You really wanna make sure you have enough surface for it to catch. This was not gonna get there. I didn't think it was gonna hold very well. So redid it. In that process, I also added this little stick. So now he's a little popsicle stick. Forbidden popsicle stick. Mainly because I was kind of racking my brain, not sure how I was gonna secure it down onto the base. This is actually what I'm gonna use as my base. It's just it's a little dome that I found at a craft store. It's one of those floral domes and there's a hole poked in it already. It's just gonna go, oh my gosh. I had it fitting a second ago, hang on. There we go. It sits in like that. This is what we're going to build it all off of. And I think it's gonna work okay. I'm going to be building some foam pieces to go across it to make it look like that mound that it is. And then I'm also gonna be adding some details on top of that. First though, we gotta do the circuit. The other problem that I had with the previous one was the channel for the wires were a little too small. I could have sanded or filed it out a bit, but I didn't want to do that. While I was in here anyway, adding a little stick, I figured let's widen the base a little bit so we can get some wiring in there. I want this to be a little easier. It is okay to redo things. It's in a half right now for easy printing. It's essentially a little cylinder that I printed in halves. I can just glue the halves together. But the extra detail I added this little hole here so I can feed wires through that. So the wiring, it's gonna go in here, but the wires will poke out. The little channel is gonna end here so the wires can pull out. So the idea is going to be, I will be able to unplug this from the base so I can travel with it easier. That way, I can keep this really safe because these little sticks, this stick, even after I glue it together, I feel like it's gonna be a little fragile. Prints, depending on how thin they are, can be a little fragile. That's the idea. I'm gonna be able to wrap him up in a little burrito when I travel with him, and he'll hopefully be safe. And there'll be a little plug so I can plug him in. I'm gonna attach all of the electronics, all the logic electronics will be on the inside of the base. I am going to clean this out next and get started on the circuit. And that will be the next step we go with. Wish me luck. Removing supports round 2. You can see it's much easier to remove the supports now than compared to the first one. It's sitting way more flush, so much easier to print. I'm just certain that it's going to be so much easier to glue. This just goes to show that when you're 3D printing, it's definitely a good thing to test and iterate, especially if something isn't working right for you. Look at that pretty friend. So much better. Also, excuse my inclination to make everything a puppet. That's the crocodile. Look at him. We have fun here. Now that we have a stick, we gotta remove the supports from that too, so we can make room for the wires. I was worried at first that the stick was gonna be a little tricky since it's smaller and thinner, but it actually worked out just fine. That being said, if you are using my print for this, definitely be a little careful as you do it, but it's probably not gonna give you too much trouble. Here you can see me testing the stick with the light just to make sure things are gonna fit together okay. After that check, we're all good to go. I started measuring out some wires, so now we're gonna move on to soldering that circuit. In the beginning, I tried using some programmable LEDs that I had lying around. These ended up not working, but I'll get into why shortly. For the brain of the circuit, I'm using a Trinket Pro 5V and a power boost from Adafruit. This is a setup I've taken from a previous project, and for that project, I followed this tutorial from Cosplay many years ago. I've provided the link below. It still works fine, so it was totally cool to reuse this. The first thing we need to do is add a wire to a plug so we can unplug the light from the base. I'm using green for data, red for power, and black for ground, but you can really use any colors you want. Important safety tip, make sure that when you're soldering, you always solder your power very last, just to be safe. After finishing each soldering joint, make sure that you cover up the exposed wire with some electrical tape or some heat shrink tubing. Gotta keep those fellas cozy. It works! Now we have a circuit we can test with. The LEDs default to blue, so now we're gonna need to give them some code so they know what to do. Using the Arduino program, we can edit some of that code. This is what my code looked like for the Grace. I wanted it to be a gold color and to pulse slightly to give it some movement. The code is based on the NeoPixel library from Adafruit. I've added links for the tutorial on how to add that library, as well as the link for this exact code in the description. After testing out the circuit with these LEDs, I decided I didn't really like them since they weren't creating a solid glowing effect. But that's okay, because adjusting circuits is really easy. You just have to reheat the solder and they come right off. So we just have to reheat the power and the ground, and we are ready to add something else to this circuit. Don't worry fellas, we'll use you for another project. Now to replace the LEDs with something else. So let's try out the NeoPixel LED strips from Adafruit. These are the type that have more LEDs per meter to make sure there are no gaps in the light. To add in the strip, figure out how long it needs to be to still fit inside the light, and then cut them along the cut line with scissors. The strips come with these set of wires already attached. They didn't quite fit my needs, so I ended up removing them. Soldering LED strips is much more simple than doing individual LEDs. To connect them, we only have to solder the 3 points that match with our wires, data in the middle, and power and ground on either side. And that's it! To finish out our light, we need to cut out a second LED strip to the same length and place them back to back so they light everything evenly. Just to be on the safe side, I put hot glue on each soldering point to create a space between the two strips so nothing shifted and accidentally caused a short. Shorts are really bad when dealing with electronics. It could cause your battery to overheat or even blow out your circuit so it won't even turn on at all. Another very important note, be sure to pay attention to the little arrows on the strips. Those indicate the direction that the data will flow. You want the arrows pointing away from where you soldered your data wire. That means your front piece should point up and your back piece should point down. At the end, I added some extra glue to make sure the soldering points here wouldn't be able to touch the wire connection. No shorts on my watch. To connect the two strips, we'll add some solder to each point, making sure the solder bridges between the two strips. Be careful here to make sure that the solder on each point doesn't connect to the others on either side. Let's go ahead and flip that guy over just so we can add some extra solder to each point, just to make sure that we have a really good connection. Now to test it to make sure it works. As you work, I definitely recommend you test your circuit often at each step to make sure everything is still okay. To attach our strip to the print, just slap some hot glue over those wires at the base and you should be good to go. I noticed that the top and bottom LEDs on each strip weren't quite diffused enough since they were really close to the outside of the print. I placed a little piece of LED foam over them to diffuse them a bit before gluing the two print halves together with super glue. Now that we have our light done, we can work on the base. I started with a floral dome that I found at a local craft store. This one was a little too tall for what I needed, so I cut off a couple inches from the bottom. This gave me some extra foam to work with, and these pieces were perfect to add some stability to the dome. The stick of the light will need some more material to go through to keep it steady, so I'm using the foam that I took off the bottom, and I glued it directly underneath the hole in the center. I ended up using 3 pieces for this, just for that extra security. After that, I used a pencil and an awl to continue the hole through the new foam I just added. And it works! Yay! Look at us. We have a thing on a stick now. Hooray! The next thing we need to do is add another hole, but this is going to be for the wires that go to the light. This hole needs to be a little wider to account for the plug, but don't worry about it. We're gonna hide this, I promise. The last thing we need to do to the base is add a little skirt to attach the foam pieces to. I'm using the other foam ring I had left from cutting the bottom of the dome. I cut out some of the middle so I could glue it around the outside of the base. I promise this will make sense in a second. I cut a little bevel on the foam skirt to give the foam pieces that we're about to make more surface to grab onto. Seriously, I promise this will make sense in a second. Trust the process. To make the little bark pieces that cover the mound, let's cut out some blobby shapes out of 2mm craft foam. I looked at screenshots of the mound from a few angles while cutting these out, but you don't have to be exact with it. Just cut out a bunch of shapes of different lengths and widths and go crazy with it. To make the foam look more like bark, it's time to add some grain lines. I first drew out some lines with a pencil so I could plan ahead and get the look I wanted. To add the dimension we're gonna need, I used a flat head jewelry screwdriver and scored along the lines I drew. Here you can use anything that can make a small line, but be sure not to cut all the way through. This is just a slight scoring we need to do here. To get those lines to show up better, I found this embossing tool I had lying around. You don't have to use this tool, you can use any blunted metal tool, even a metal butter knife would work for this. Use that tool to drag along those scored lines to indent them further. Next, we'll want to rough up them edges of the foam. So very carefully, take a small craft knife and cut the edges around the piece. We want this to look kind of messed up, so make sure to cut out little chunks here and there to really sell that crusty bark look. And now for the spice. If you want to add some dimension, on a few of them you can cut the foam into multiple pieces and then glue those back together using hot glue to make it look like layers of bark are peeling off in some places. It's time to heat seal each of these friends with a heat gun. This shrinks up the pores of the foam, making them accept paint much more easily, and has the added effect of making the lines we added stand out way more. So, still working on the bark, but I just wanted to show you all the difference between when I heat gun versus no heat gun. So you can see that the bevels are a little softer, a little less harsh, and they kind of have this nice rounding effect. So that's really the effect I'm trying to go for. So you can kind of see the difference. So yeah, still more bark to go. We're getting there though. With all the pieces sealed, we can now attach them to the base. Hot glue works really well for attaching the bark pieces to the base. Make sure to put glue towards the top and some towards the bottom where the foam touches the skirt. You can see that the skirt makes the foam pieces flare out a little bit rather than going straight into the ground. This should help protect the bark from getting caught on stuff when you set it down or pick it up. See, I told you it'd make sense. And now that base is all ready for painting. First, we gotta prime that foam. For that, I'm using Mod Podge with a matte finish. Because this is supposed to be bark, I didn't want my finish to look perfectly smooth. It's hard to get a smooth finish with Mod Podge, so it was really perfect for this. The other benefit to it is that it's non-toxic, so you can do it indoors and not worry about any of those nasty fumes. Apply the Mod Podge by first jamming it into the crevices and then smoothing it out. Make sure to go the same direction as the grain lines in the bark. This way, the texture from the Mod Podge would accentuate the lines we made earlier. The instructions on the Mod Podge recommend multiple coats, so I did 3 just to be safe. Let each coat dry first before adding the next one. Here's what 3 layers of dried Mod Podge looks like. All right. Got this in. It says temporary hold, and we are going to test it. Hit the switch. Ooh! It is very gold, which is pretty perfect. Yes. Yes. Y'all ready for some painting? Let's go. Since I used red foam like a silly pants, I needed to get a really good base coat. I'm using Liquitex in white. It's a really good quality acrylic paint, and it's not too expensive and available at a lot of craft stores. Apply the paint the same way you did the Mod Podge, getting it into the crevices and then going back over it to smooth it out. And make sure the brush strokes are going the same direction as the grain lines. I did 2 coats of white, letting the first one dry a bit before applying the second one. For the third coat, I mixed together a light beige color. To get this color, use mostly white and add just a little bit of burnt sienna or some other brown that you like. When mixing paint, always add just a little pigment at a time when doing light colors. It's very easy to darken a shade, but takes way more paint to lighten it. Make sure that this color is a little lighter than what you want your end result to be. We're going to be applying a wash over this, so it will get darkened a bit. Again, apply this coat the same way as you did the other paint layers. Now for the really fun part, we get to mix up some wash. I'm using blue, burnt sienna, and a darker brown. The reason for the blue is shadows are generally bluer or cooler than the object creating the shadows. Shadows aren't actually black. While I have you here, let's do a quick color theory lesson. If you ever hear the term cooler or warmer when someone talks about colors, this is what they mean. Generally in color theory, warm means closer to a red-orange color and cool means closer to a blue-green. There's a debate on which color is the warmest or which one is the coolest though. As an example, yellow is closer to red and orange than green is, so on the color wheel, it is the warmer color. To use the wash, all you need to do is just add a little bit of paint and way more water than you normally would use. First, you brush the wash on your piece, and then take a paper towel and wipe it away so the pigment stays only in the crevices and the cracks. Do this all over until you've weathered the whole thing. The last painting step is to add in some shadows. For this, you can use a small detail brush and mix paint very similar to the shade that we used for the wash. Just use less water. Hit some of the grain lines with the paint as well as some of the areas where the pieces overlap. Here you can still use the paper towel to wipe away any brush strokes that come out a little too dark or solid. Just finished all the painting on the mound, and now we're at that really fun part that I've been super excited about, and that's adding the details to this thing. So let me show y'all what I will be using. Firstly, I'm gonna be using this green moss I found at a local craft store. Basically, I just raided the floral section and found a bunch of things that I thought would work really well. So this is this green moss. I'm not sure if it's real. It seems like it might be real moss. I don't know. It's kind of smelly, so yeah, I'm very excited about this. This is probably my favorite thing that I bought for this. Next, I bought this stringy brown moss. It's gonna make a mess, I'm sure, but should be fun. We'll see if it glues. Who knows? Who knows? I also bought a branch, this little branch here. What I'm gonna be doing with this is trimming off these little pieces here and painting them and using them for the little roots that come off the base of the mound. So that's what the real Grace in the game has, these little branches, these little roots that come off. So that's what that's for. Yeah. And lastly is the grass. I found this grass. I'm very excited about it. It's really cool. It's really fun to play with. And so what's really cool about this is it has a lot of colors in it. It has various greens and reds and browns. So I think it's gonna be really cool. It's gonna look a little more realistic. I'm gonna make sure to use as many different types of colors on this. So I think it'll make it look a little more realistic. So very excited. So it is now time to glue. Are y'all ready? I think I am. Yeah. Let's start by hot gluing the brown scraggly moss on top to help cover our holes. This moss will give us some really good coverage with not a whole lot of effort. To hide the wires, tape them together with electrical tape and then glue some of the green moss on top of that. See, it's invisible. Where did it go? There are no wires here. What are you even talking about? Let's continue adding that moss. Mix it up with the green moss too. I kind of just went with my gut here and went with what I thought looked good. So definitely play around and see what you like. This is your mound. You can make it whatever you want. For the roots that come off of the base, cut up that branch into pieces long enough to jam into the foam base, but still be visible from underneath the bark. Coat them in the same shade of paint as the base. Once they're dry, cut holes into the base's skirt and attach them with hot glue. You really can't put too much hot glue on this to keep it secure, just go crazy. And for the last little bit of seasoning, we have the blades of grass. Cut the blades of grass in various lengths and attach them with hot glue. I made sure to pick blades that were different colors from each other so it looked a little more realistic. If you're finding some of your blades of grass won't stand up too well, it's okay to use a little bit of moss at the base to help keep them secure. If you're having trouble standing up, it's okay to ask for help sometimes. And now, with the last details done, we can assemble. The light plugs into the cord that comes from the trinket and the power boost. For attaching the power boost and the trinket to the base, I just used a little bit of hot glue on some of the wires. I'm using a rechargeable LiPo battery from Adafruit to power this. I attached sticky back Velcro to it to attach to the base. For the switch, cut out a little bit of a notch in the foam base skirt to house it and place a little foam over it just to make sure that nothing catches on it. At last, here is our final result. Look at that guy. I just want to touch it and use all of my runes to dump into strength stats, so maybe Margit will stop laughing at me, maybe? And that's it, we're done, yay! We have a cool thing now, woo! Great job if you watched that whole thing. I know it was lengthy, so thank you so much for coming along with me on this journey. It was a really fun one, very fun prop to make. Not really something I've done before, so very exciting. As I said in the beginning, I put all of the 3D models I made for this project, as well as the code, up on my Patreon for free. So if you do end up making one, please tag me. I would love to see yours. I'd really love to see a bunch of these at cons, so maybe they'd help us get past all the boss fights that we run into at conventions, like, I don't know, spending too much money at the artist alley, forgetting to eat lunch, you know, basically all the things at the conventions that we kind of fail at. If this video was at all helpful to you, please give it a like. It really does help the channel. And if you haven't yet, definitely subscribe. I will be doing more of these videos in the future. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions or if you just want to say hi. I really like it when people say hi. And if you'd like to support the channel further, I have a Patreon now and you can go join it. The link is down in the description below. I will be posting future videos there early, as well as adding other perks very soon. So thanks for checking that out. I hope you all have a wonderful day and keep cosplay fun. Bye.
Hope you all had fun.